What's up, friends of YouTube? Derek Van Diest here with Zandam Music. In today's episode, we're going to be taking a look at the beat Origami. We're going to look at the instruments used, the arrangement, and the mix process. So let's get right into it. Alright, we're going to start by listening to the entire beat one time through so that we have a good idea of what we're looking at. That's the beat. So first off, I want to start by saying I recently discovered how to use this arranger to properly arrange my beats. And I basically used this the beat Pull Up by Sui Generis. I used that same arrangement to create this beat. But that's the only thing I took from that beat. So the arrangement is the intro, hook, one verse, another hook, and then the outro. So I got more organized and decided to put all my instruments in pack folders. I have a bass folder, a drum folder, instrument folder, pad folder, effect folder, and then the beat tag. I will be removing the beat tag, or I simply just mute it before I go into the mastering process. Alright, so I'm going to start with the instruments used, and the only thing I used for this beat is a sample that I took from the Contact Library Urban Legacy XXL, and this is the original sample here. So I took that sample and broke it down and used all the parts that were needed, all the layers that were needed to create that, which are sounds like these here. And there's a lot of them here, I think 64 sounds. So anyways, I took each one of those sounds and I put them together to create my own sample. So that's how I got this here. And first of all, I created a sample that was 8 bars, so it was just this long, and I time stretched it by holding Alt and then moving it like this, and I time stretched it. Then I transposed it down 6 and tuned it up 6, and then I stretched it back. So this is what the sample sounds like. Sounds completely different from the one you just heard. So let me solo it. You can hear that pad. I switched it up, pitched it up and down. So anyways, that's how I made the sample, and it plays all the way through in different patterns. So we have two different patterns, or three patterns total. All right, and that's the instrument used. All right, so next I have two pad sounds, pad 1 and pad 2. The first one I used cryogenic freeze from pads and strings in Omnisphere. And here's what the first one sounds like. Alright, the second pad sound is also from Omnisphere. It's the crystal pipes from the pads and strings folder. This is what the second one sounds like. Alright, this is what they both sound like together. And this is what they sound like with the sample. Alright, so those are the pads that I used throughout the entire beat. And up next we have some effects. And I used an instance of Exhale. And the preset that I used is They Can't Cut Me Up from the loop section. This is what Exhale sounds like. This is what it sounds like with the pads and the sample. Alright, and then I also used a Razer as well, and I'll show you what the Razer sounds like here. One more time. Alright, and I used the Razer VST with the Windy Atonal Pitch Rise preset. Alright, those are the effects I used. Then we have my beat tag. I'll play it here for you guys. Okay, and I'm also going to be muting that before the mastering process. Okay, so let's go up to the bass. And for this, I used an 808. And I'll pull it up here. 808 Madness from the Contact. And here's what the 808 sounds like. So I used 3 different patterns for the 808. That was pattern 1. Here's pattern 2. Alright, pattern 3 is the same thing, but instead of going down at the second half, it goes up. Here's pattern 3. Alright, so those are the 808s. Now for the bass stab, I used the same loop bass from the sample. And I did my transposing, and this is what I got from it. Alright. I used. Up next we have the drums. And here in the drums, I have 2 kick patterns. I'll show you what the kick sounds like here. It's the same kick, but 2 different patterns. And this is what it sounds like with the bass. Alright, and for that I used a sample 1, Nick Myra, kick from his pack. And up next I have a snare. And I got this snare from the soundoracle.net sample pack. And shout out to Sound Oracle. If you guys are looking for some great sounds, soundoracle.net, that's the place to go. So far, that's been my favorite place to go for my sounds. So that was my snare, and I'll show you what that sounds like here. So I just love that snare sound. Alright, and up next we have clap. This is also from Sound Oracle. Here's what the clap sounds like. Alright, up next we have a hi-hat, another Nick Myra hi-hat from sample 1, or using a sample 1. Here's the hi-hat. Alright, now for the open hat, I also used a sample 1 with a Nick Myra hat. Alright, and then I also used a crash. I believe this one is from Sound Oracle. I don't remember. And that's a really nice crash. Okay, so up next I use a perk. This is from Nick Myra. This is what it sounds like. I love that perk too. Alright, and then we also have another perk here as well. This one is from Sound Oracle, the Rolling Metal perk, and I've used this before. It's a really cool sound. Alright, and those are all the drum sounds that I used. This is what they all sound like together. Alright, so now let's go over the arrangement. So those were all the instruments and sounds that I used. So for the arrangement, I have an intro, a hook section, a verse, and another hook section, and then the outro. So starting with the intro, let me open up all the instruments here. And then I used quite a bit of sounds, so I'm gonna bring it down to the tiny setting so we can see most of it. Alright, for the intro section, I have it playing 16 bars in length. It starts off with the sample and the pads for the first 8 bars. Then I introduce the exhale effect, as well as the kick, and some bass stabs for the second part of the intro. Alright, to transition right into the hook, I include the riser, and I also have the beat tag going into the hook. So I'm going to play the second part of the intro into the first part of the hook. Oh, also, I introduced all the drum parts for the hook here right off the bat. I put all the sounds together for the first part of the hook and the first 808 pattern as well. So let's play it through. Alright, so this part of the song has most of the energy. So that's the first half of the hook. To switch it up on the next 8 bars for the second half of the hook, I changed the 808 pattern and I sped it up so it's a little faster. Let me play the second half. Alright, so transitioning from the hook to the verse, I used a crash. So I used the crash pretty much before each transition, before the second half of the hook here as well. And that really helps transition to the verse, because I drop the 808 and I go to those bass stabs that I used for the second half of the intro, and I have that playing throughout the whole verse just to give it some more bass. And I also took the exhale effect off because I thought it was too much for the verse. So when the verse, also, I'm sorry, one more thing. For the first half of the verse, I don't have the hi-hats, and for the second half, I do have the hi-hats, just to switch it up. And then at the end of the second half of the verse, I put another riser to transition to the second hook. So let's play the verse one time through. And that's the second hook here. So the second hook, first half, hook 2A, this half here, is the same as hook A. Pretty much exactly the same, yep. The only place where I switch up the two hooks are in the 808 pattern. You'll see here I have a different 808 pattern. The only difference here is that the 808 goes up instead of going down like it did here, pattern 2. And then after it plays out, it goes to the outro. So let's play it to the outro. Okay, so what I did to transition to the outro is I dropped all the drums and I put the riser just before it. And let's see, that's it. And I dropped the back in. And that's how it ends. It basically just finishes off the way the intro started. So let's end it here. So the reverb carries on a little bit after that, and it's a nice little effect. Alright, so now we have the arrangement and the instruments. Let's get into the mix process. So let's see exactly what I did here in the mixer. So let's start off with the 808s. For the 808s, I used a FabFilter Pro Q, and I did a low cut, a high cut, and I rose just before the dip. I also have a compressor to sidechain the kick with. And once I bounced it, I also put a virtual mix rack from Slate Digital. And I just got this pack from Slate Digital and I love it, so I've been using it a lot lately. I've been using this virtual channel on every single one of my channels to give it a console, an emulated console effect. So I have this on the USA setting. That's the only parameter that I adjusted here. So I have a virtual channel on all my sounds. Okay, so that's the only thing I have on the 808 here, those that I showed you. For the bass stab, also, by the way, guys, all the bass sounds are routed to the bass bus channel. So the bass stabs, I don't have anything, or I do have some stuff. I actually have quite a bit. So I do have the virtual mix rack, like I do on all my channels. And I also have an air EQ that I adjusted here to give it a little more of an EQ. Also, I'm just learning how to use those Slate Digital products. So this is probably my first or second project using them. Okay, so next up I have a FabFilter Q with a high cut. Then I have a sausage fattener with about 5%. Then I have a 4040 retro limiter. And I also have a sidechain compressor for the kick. Up next I have the beat tag, and I have that routed to the vocal bus channel. And for this I'm using a virtual rack channel and auto tune 8 with F sharp minor, and that's the scale of the song, of the beat that I made here. Also the 20 retune speed and 90 humanize. Okay, so up next I have the let's go over all the drums. So the kick I have a FabFilter Pro Q, and this is what I'm using. I have that sidechain to the 808. Alright, I also have a virtual mix rack on the kick, and I have another EQ on the kick. So for the snare, by the way, these are on the drum bus channel. All of these are on the drum bus channel. This is what I did with the snare. I used the drum preset and then I adjusted it by ear. Okay, this one also has a virtual mix rack. So I'm going to stop showing the virtual mix rack because I think they all have it. So clap, I didn't do anything with the clap. Yep, nothing. Except that virtual channel. And for the hi-hat, I did nothing but a... Oh, here we go. I did a virtual mix rack, the channel here. I also played with this EQ. And I rose the high end a little bit, dropped some of the middle end, and I dropped the low end as well. Then I also put a vintage compressor on and adjusted the settings there accordingly. Alright, up next we have an open hat. And for that, I messed around with the EQ. I also did some vintage compression. For the crash, I did the same thing, some EQ settings, some compression, and the virtual channel. And honestly, I was just learning how to use all those virtual analog products from Slate Digital. So for the first perk, I was messing around with the EQ and the compressor as well. For the second perk, I messed around with the EQ and compressor. Alright, and those are all the drums. Alright, so moving on to the pad sounds now. So for the first pad sound, I used a FabFilter Pro Q with a low cut. I also used an Ozonate imager with the multi-band depth setting. I also click learn so that the bands adjust according to the sound. Alright, what else did I do? These also have the virtual channels. I put a second EQ on here and boosted the highs, mids, dropped the lows, messed around with the vintage compressor. And this is routed to my instrument bus channel. All the pad sounds are on the instrument bus channels. Pad 2. I also messed around with the EQ and compressor. And I also used a low cut fab filter. And I also used an instance of Ozonate imager, multi-band depth. Alright, and those are all the pad sounds there. Alright, and then last but not least, the effects. We have Exhale, where I used a FabFilter low cut. Alright, I used an Ozonate imager with the gentle width setting. Okay, I also used a virtual mix rack, and I used 2 EQs. So I messed around with these, and I'm starting to learn this air EQ, so I played around with that too. Alright, and all these effects are routed to the FX bus channel. For the riser, I'm using another virtual mix rack with an EQ and a vintage compressor. And I'm using an Ozonate imager with modern width. And that's it for all the instrument effects. So up next, I have my plate reverb. And for this, I'm using the standard Valhalla vintage verb with the drum plate. I always use these settings for my reverbs. I have the same hall, which is the vintage very nice hall. And for the room reverb, I'm using Altiverb 7 SARM West Studios preset. For the pan man effect, I'm using a wider and wider effect. And the pan man, let me just tell you which instruments are in the pan man right now. Let me just open up all the folders here. I believe it's in the effect folder. Let's see. Yeah, Panman. Okay, so, or hold up a second. Yep, so Exhale. I'm using Panman on Exhale. And I think that's the only one, but I'll double check here. Yeah. Okay, so Panman is on Exhale. Now for the bus channels, on the bass bus channel, I have a virtual mix rack with the virtual mix bus. So this one is on the Brit 4KE setting. So all my virtual channels are on the USA setting, and all my virtual mix buses are on the Brit 4K setting. I also have an Ozonate imager, and I took down the low stereo to make it mono for the bass. I also have a little bit of a room reverb on that channel. For the drum bus channel, I'm using a virtual mix rack with a virtual mix bus. I'm also using a decapitator with the drum fattener 1, a little bit of drive on the E set style. I'm also using a plate reverb and the room reverb. For the instrument, I'm using the same virtual mix rack mix bus and a room reverb. For the vocals, which is only the beat tag, so it doesn't really matter, I'm using the same virtual mix rack. And for the effects, I'm using the same virtual mix bus with a room and hall reverb. So I have, for the filter, or hold up a second here. Okay, for the filter, I'm not using anything. Filter bypass, I'm not using anything. The mix bus, I'm using an Ozonate imager. I don't know why I'm using that on the mix bus. I actually don't need it, so I'm going to remove it. That was a mistake. Alright, and these green channels here are just the VCAs, so I can turn down the volume for the either the bus, bass, drums, instrument, vocals, effects, or the reverb. And the way that I have that routed is down here, you can see it says effects, instruments, or reverb down here, and these all affect the VCA channels. Oh, okay, and then my master channel, I'm using an Ozonate equalizer with a brick wall at 30 Hz and another brick wall here at 18,000 kilohertz. And I'm also using a song key, and we're in F sharp minor. And sample grabber is for a different program. So let's see here. That's pretty much everything I did for the mix process. So I used no automation on this beat at all. And that's it. That concludes the beat. So I hope you guys liked it. That's Origami. And if you guys like the beat and you want to purchase it, you can buy a 1-year lease, or you can buy exclusive rights from my website, which is zandammusic.com. So thank you all for tuning into this episode, and I'll see you in the next one. Take care.